Hi, my name is Katie Powell of the Youth Advisory Board with the Children's Science Center Lab. I'm a longtime volunteer and a junior at Westfield High School, and I'm here today to introduce you to Molly Menzel, who has joined us for the STEM Champion interview series. Molly Menzel is an atmospheric scientist who studies how weather patterns are responding to changing climate. She is currently a NASA Post-Doctoral Program Fellow at the Goddard Institute for Space Studies and received her PhD in Earth and Planetary Sciences from Johns Hopkins University. In her research, she uses both idealized and fully comprehensive global climate models that present valuable insight to past, present, and future climates. Additionally, Molly actively seeks out opportunities to teach the physical laws governing our atmosphere and climate, both within and outside of the classroom. The STEM Champion interview series highlights the diverse STEM community and the journey STEM champions have taken, allowing children and young adults to see what is achievable. During our conversation, Molly Menzel will discuss her background and career as well as insights on future of atmospheric science. Welcome, Molly Menzel.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Before we discuss your journey today, can you tell us more about your role at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies?
Yeah, so I'm what's known as a postdoctoral fellow. Essentially, after you finish your PhD, you can work as a postdoctoral fellow or a postdoctoral researcher. They're usually temporary stints, but my role and my job is just full-time research. So
Oh.
we identify the gaps in our knowledge scientifically in atmospheric science. A lot of our research questions are motivated by how the atmosphere impacts us here on the surface. And after identifying those gaps in knowledge, we develop research methods or plans to answer those questions. And then a big part of my job is also communicating those results or sharing those results. A lot of that happens within the science community. So it's writing scientific journal articles or going to conferences to present work. But I also try to present those results outside the scientific community as well.
That's very cool. Wow. What inspired you to go into atmospheric science?
Yeah, so this was a bit of a meandering journey for me. At least growing up, I was always felt very. I felt like math and physics I understood pretty well, especially math. It wasn't until high school when I took physics that I felt like math was very useful because we could use it to describe the physical world we live in. Then in college, I actually was an engineering degree, and my major was a bit theoretical. It was engineering science mechanics, but it's essentially engineering physics. And through that major, I specialized in fluid dynamics. So how air, how water, just the dynamics and physics involved with their movement. And I loved that concentration and realized as a senior in college, a very applicable field of science was atmospheric and oceanic science. Because if you think about it, both the atmosphere and the ocean are just massive bodies of fluid around our planet that's rotating. So that's kind of what put me on that trajectory.
That's very cool. Was I know you mentioned that like growing up, math and physics or in high school, physics was easier, but was it like you started out with a love-hate relationship or was it like you knew this is like my go-to subject in school?
Yeah. Math I always felt pretty comfortable in, but I didn't feel inspired by math. I didn't find it interesting necessarily. Um, it made sense to me. But I would also say I was quite creative in school. I was actually a dancer, so ballerina, and especially I really enjoyed kind of more artistic classes, and in some ways the liberal arts felt more creative than math necessarily did. So when I was choosing, what college degree, I was a bit torn. I kind of felt like going towards a more STEM oriented career, maybe I'd have to, I don't know, let go of that creative aspect of who I am. But I think that's actually uh, maybe a false belief that I had. I think even now I really do. benefit from kind of the more creative side of my mind. Maybe that didn't wasn't super intuitive in high school, and maybe even in college when I was just taking classes, it was hard to be creative. But
Yeah.
as a scientist, you really do have to get creative on understanding what are the research projects that interest me enough to keep me motivated, but also are very relevant to our society. And then developing the experimental design or the methods that can be a very creative thing as well.
I definitely agree. Like in high school today, I wouldn't say they're very restricting, but they have like the standards they have to teach by. So it doesn't give you a lot of freedom to like experiment with what you want to do in like the outside of high school world. But I don't know, maybe there's some change in the field that could happen.
Yeah.
So for your college experience in atmospheric science, how was it? Like, was it rigorous? Like, what were the details of it?
Yes, and actually, I should specify that in college, I was in engineering, and that was very rigorous. That was a lot of classes. I look back on it, and part of me is wondering how I survived. No doubt, I was able to get through it because I had a great camaraderie of other students where we would study together and learn from each other. And I don't think I could have gotten through the course load without those really good friends I made in the degree. Um, in comparison, atmospheric science, both in my master's and my PhD, it didn't feel as much of a struggle, but I think that's because I also was more just interested in the field in of itself. I had a bit more motivation in my coursework. Um, and in graduate school, you're doing a little bit more of coursework in addition to research. And so there's a bit of balance, the coursework. You're not often just focused on classes all the time. So that was just a better environment, I think, for me.
Very cool. Did you encounter any obstacles like on your way into the industry, or is it easy sailing?
Um, there, I wouldn't call it easy sailing. I think definitely graduate school can be a quite a sacrifice, um, in the sense that you are still a student, and for me, that was an additional 7 years of being a student outside of my undergrad. Yeah, compare. So you take a sacrifice financially, because even if you're able to find a program that will fund your master's or PhD, usually you are able to find funding. You're not receiving the same salary or living as you would if you were to get a job right out of undergrad, especially coming from a more STEM focused degree. So
Mhm.
there was a bit of a sacrifice financially there. And it's just a big commitment, in many ways. Sometimes in graduate school, research projects are very long. They tend to last several years. They progress a lot more slowly, and sometimes it can be difficult in the midst of a project, not knowing how it ends, not really seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Somewhat it can be somewhat difficult to find motivation. Um, so that those are kind of the main struggles that really come out to me.
Mm. For your research project, do you want to give a quick detail on it or what exactly it was?
Yeah, in many ways, I'm kind of continuing it in my postdoc, but from kind of a larger picture view, um, when we look at the atmospheric weather patterns, like say we look at a snapshot of how the winds are circulating over North America, there's an even larger context for those weather patterns, and that's what's called large scale atmospheric circulation. And so that's what I study. So it's looking at these winds on a global scale, planetary scale, from the tropics to the high latitudes. And understanding the dynamics and physics involved there, when we can understand that circulation better, it gives us a better sense of the smaller weather patterns that impact us from a day-to-day perspective.
That's very
So, well, oh, I was going to add to that, like take that circulation, it's changing with increased CO2 in ways that we don't fully understand. And so my research is really focused on how is that circulation changing, but also why.
That's very cool. And it's very like day to day and it will impact future also, which is that's amazing. Do you anticipate or foresee changes in the industry? So it could be based on like the project you were talking about or just anything that could change.
Yes. We're at a really interesting, I think, point in this field of science. The two changes I feel like I'm noticing already is that there are a lot more industry jobs for people with my expertise, particularly in climate science. So we're actually seeing a lot more researchers move to industry jobs than stay within a more academic environment. And by academic environment, I mean the universities that are doing research. So the professors where they're focused on research and teaching, but also some of the national labs like NASA or NOAA, where the National Weather Service is hosted. Um, so that seems to be a major shift, whereas maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it was, I would say it was common in the insurance industry, but I think specifically for climate focused research, this is kind of a new um, opening door for us.
Mhm.
And then also using artificial intelligence and machine learning, the applications for AI and ML, that's a huge buzzword these days where scientists are wondering how to best use it, how it can be applied, but also what are the quote best practices for its use. So how can it be used in a way that is reliable and trustworthy?
Yeah, definitely. AI will have a lot to do with our future. Backing up to that, does the aspect of that excite you in your industry, or is it kind of like, I don't know, is it exciting or no?
It depends on who you ask.
Mhm.
So I think it can be exciting. The ways it can help us kind of move past some barriers we're encountering is really hopeful. At the same time, there is a bit of caution associated with how it's used. Because in many ways, so one of the major tools in climate science specifically is just large climate models or global climate models. And they're quite complex because they include modeling the atmosphere and the ocean and the land and the sea ice and all the things. And they already are so complex that's perception that in some ways they're a bit of a black box. Like if you change one thing, you see, the butterfly effect. Like there's a lot that changes, and it can be difficult to pinpoint all of those changes in such complexity. And yet, sometimes with these AI tools, it feels maybe even more of a black box. Like we shouldn't just rely on the results that those methods present, but we should test them and validate them and understand physically why they're presenting those results. So maybe more of like being a bit more discerning about marrying the AI methods with the very physical foundational climate science that we know and are developing is probably the best route forward.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything in your industry that excites you about the future that maybe people don't think about on a day-to-day basis?
Um, well, the science is very future minded in of itself, and so I think what really excites me is that um, in theory, the research I'm a part of can be really applicable or can really help inform societies or communities how to respond to the changing climate that they're experiencing, either in adaptation or hopefully in mitigation endeavors as well. And so that's really exciting to be a part of a field that feels very relevant to us now, but also in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any additional advice for younger generations regarding pursuing their passion like you did?
Yeah. I guess my advice or perhaps an encouragement is to say it's okay to change your mind on what you want to do. You know, it's great to have ideas, but as you kind of go through life, some of those motivations may change, some of those interests may change, and that's absolutely okay, to kind of just follow your path uh, as those opinions or thoughts come about.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in like the college seeking process and all of that right now. So that's definitely what everybody's been saying. Like, keep your mind open. Like, it's gonna
Mhm.
change. You're not always gonna want to do the same thing. So it's very reassuring.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of the pressure off, doesn't it?
Very. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time today. Our conversation was very influential, and I will definitely be keeping it. And I know everyone who listens will also be inspired. So thank you for your interview.